everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you Didi, Gary, and all the people involved in the organization of this event. It's not easy, as you know, so thank you for bringing me here, and thank you for all the people in the community that support me to be here today. For me, it's not easy. Came from Argentina, and so I really appreciate all the people that support me. I hope you understand my English. Maybe I'm gonna invent some words in the fly, but it's necessary for me. And I want to start because my presentations are mixed a little bit between science and between history and symbology. So this time is not going to be different. So I'm going to make an holistic view of my perspective on the flat Earth, because for me, right now, after 5 years of being a researcher and a lot of people putting calculations and observations and experiments and out there for everyone to look at, it's very easy to understand that the Earth is flat and in stationary plane. You don't need more than study the mechanics of the fluid and make some observations and looking into the history of the science to know that something is wrong. There are people that are lying to us all the time in other situations of the life, like the politicians or the education system, the pharmaceuticals, the sports even. There are corruption out there in any directions we look. So there is no easy. Difficult to understand that we've been told lies all our life, but for me it's really important to understand the foundations of our scientific institutions and profit. So for anyone who wants to are new to the flat Earth and want to at least have some principal point to understand why we believe that the Earth is in stationary plane, I recommend this kind of observations, experiments, and the first one are related with the motion of the Earth, the four first ones. Then we have a few other for understanding our Big Bang cosmology. We have also mechanisms to understand how in the antiquity, the cosmology, the science of the antiquity, measure our sky, our movement in the sky. The Antikythera mechanism is one of the device for me, one of the most important device for understanding our sky. The gyroscope, the spirit level, the compact, the sextant, long-range laser test, the long-range observation with infrared lenses like G-Tolan Media doing his channel, is amazing. The high-altitude balloon cameras, the long-distance microwave and radio wave, our senses, of course, that will be nice to pay attention, because sometimes the modern science trying to take up our senses, and supposedly they lie to us. So that is why we create instruments to try to contrast our senses. And when our senses and the instruments detect the same thing, that is something to take into account very seriously. For example, like the rotation of the Earth. The J-Tolan Media, for me, made one of the best observations of long-distance objects or landscape that supposedly we are not able to see if we live in a sphere of 12,000 kilometers of diameter. We are talking about these observations. Some of these observations take place more than 400 miles to the horizon, and supposedly at that altitude, at 10 kilometers from a plane, we only see 350, 100 kilometers to the horizon, and this is like sometimes is 3 times more than that observation. So, and you can clearly see in his videos, you can clearly see the horizon even continue behind the mountains. So that is more an evidence that we live in really big plane, and the horizon is always at eye level than the sphere of the size that the science priest give us. So I just pointed out this very quickly because it's not the main subject of my presentation, but I know that there is maybe new people to this, and this could be, just a starting point to understand why we don't believe that we live in a sphere. And I say believe because for everyone out there is a belief. Nobody is an astronaut, nobody go into the space, so if you want to believe that for me it's okay. We have a long distance observation also in Argentina, which defied the globe measurement from Uruguay. You can see a lot of buildings to Buenos Aires that supposedly we have 54 kilometers away from the coast of Uruguay to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and there is almost 200 meters of curvature. And if you research how many buildings are more tall than that height, we don't have even one. So of course, you at least you must have to you must be see, some buildings, just the tip of the building of the most highest. Like for example, this tower is not yet finished, but supposedly it's going to measure 200 meters. But the rest of the building, that's the tallest building in Buenos Aires, are these only 10 to 12 buildings, and all the height is 172 meters, 160 meters, 145 meters. So you have only 12 to 13 buildings to see. And for example, this guy filmed from Uruguay to Buenos Aires, and I put some contrast filter to see, but you can see clearly that we see a lot of buildings more than supposedly the observations allowed. And this is just a regular guy filming from 3 meters height from the coast. And if you do the math, this is not possible. Because here, in fact, you can clearly see there is not even the refraction issue. This is a clear image. Of course, the buildings are cut off because perspective, because the air layers, how the light behave in the medium of the air. But you can clearly see, if you start counting, you're going to see more than 30 buildings. And most of them, they are not even in the coast of Buenos Aires. It's deep inside the city. So this kind of observation, for me, it's crucial to understand if you want to check for yourself via an observation. Of course, everyone here knows the Joshua Nowicki observation of the Chicago to Michigan. Of course, we understand how the refractions work, how it's not the curvature of the air that is changing, it's just how the light or how the objects behave when you look through air. It's just that, it's not based on curvature. I'm not going to spend so much time in this, but we can reproduce that on lab. For example, at the top of here, in the left top corner, you can see how this nanotube of carbon, they are just changing the temperature of that, and you can see how change the index of refraction. You can have like invisible, or you can bring it back to the view, and that is what happened with the air and the light, if you want to see in that way. So we have all these kind of phenomena that explain why we don't see sometimes infinity into the distance. It's just matter of the climate, weather, the climate conditions, and how these phenomena interact with this layer of air. So I can spend more time in this. Sorry for my fast presentation on that topic. I did that on Blockbuster and the Shannon's channel, so if you want to check out. But like I told you before, for me it's more important how we receive our education. And for that, I'm going to start via UNESCO, because along the way, you're gonna see that we are being like someone spell, like spell on us, because all the time that you're trying to find the roots of our institution, there are wizards driving that institutions. Came from the religious orders, and not the spiritual order, but the religious order. And anytime you look around, you're gonna see Jesuits, Zionists, like wizards trying to deceive us. And in our education institution, that is the same. If you look into, for example, who are behind after the Second World War, who was the first director of UNESCO, you're going to find that the Huxley family is behind that. And the first one was Julian Huxley, which was the brother of Aldous Huxley, and everyone knows maybe Aldous Huxley for his Happy World history book. And so, you can imagine that there are brothers. Of course, they came from parents that they are all in the same agenda. They are, all financial Charles Darwin work. They are all eugenicists. They are all these kind of people that give us our supposedly free education, right? Nothing is free in our days, so there has been something behind every time the word free is in front of something. And the education is important because if you, for example, Vladimir Lenin said, give me just one generation of the young people and I will transform the world, the whole world. And I spell it, but I believe, transform. But that's true, because if you start looking into the history from Galileo to our time, it's only past 6-8 generations of human, nothing more than that. And at that time, who have access to education? Just rich people. That was just a tiny group of humans that have access to knowledge. So the important is that we know that where it's come from, that knowledge. And for that, let me just play this video.
Welcome back to The World Over. In May, Pope Francis said he referenced a visit from extraterrestrials, create an interesting opportunity to discuss the relationship between faith and science. Are the two in opposition? Joining us tonight is a man who has literally pondered the mysteries of the heavens as part of his job. He is an astronomer at the Vatican Observatory and the president of the Vatican Observatory Foundation, a Jesuit, and the co-author of the new book, Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? We're delighted to have joining us Brother Guy Manuel in the studio. Great to see you, brother.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to start with this notion that people have, that there's a conflict between faith and science. You don't see it that way.
Well, of course not. I mean, here I am, I've got a collar and an MIT ring, which proves you can be at the same time a fanatic and a nerd. and I am. I'm something of a nerd about my religion, but I'm a fanatic about my science.
And that is a very important distinction, because I am a nerd of my religion, but a fanatic of my science. And if you are fanatic, you lose your mind sometimes. You're going to trying to justify everything that you need to preserve that, that fanatism, if you want to see it that way.
And what people have to remember is that science came from the church. What people have to remember is that science came from the church.
What people have to remember is that science came from the church.
Yeah.
It was invented in the medieval universities.
Yeah.
It was invented in the medieval universities.
Yeah. It was invented in the medieval universities.
Why was the church interested? Because it was interested in science, because it's interested in the physical universe, because it's interested in creation as an expression of the Creator.
So people must remember that the science came from the church. Our science, at least the occidental part of the world. The first university is created by the Vatican in the 1600s. And 50 years later came the Royal Society, founded, of course, by England, but held by the Vatican. So when you start to look in that in the big perspective, you're going to see that the first scientific guy, of course, they are all Jesuit priests, because the Jesuit order is the military and the scientific arm of the Vatican. And when they, tied up everything, they give that free information, free into quotes, to the Royal Society. And after a few centuries, it became the free education for us. But it's all, the roots is still the same. And in science, for example, it's very important that this is for Start Talk with the Grace Tyson, and they have a program which talk about religions and science. And this video is going to be a little part in English and a little part in Spanish with subtitles, because I don't know why, but National Geographic took apart the most important part for me, and I can't find the complete episode. But here you can see how important for the heliocentric model is the Jesuit order.
The American Museum of Natural History in New York City, and beaming out across all of space and time, this is Star Talk, where science and pop culture collide. And tonight's topic, science and religion. And so we combed the landscape, and we found a Jesuit priest. This is the academic order of the Catholic Church, and we have with us Father Martin. Welcome to Star Talk.
Thank you very much.
All right.
They could be invited some Rosicrucian or some Franciscan, I don't know which is the name in English, or not. They've invited a Jesuit, of course. So there is going to come the part in Spanish.
Solo quiero mandar un saludo a los jesuitas, que la Compañía de Jesús es un brazo científico importante de la Iglesia Católica y que de hecho su progreso tremendo, el de los jesuitas, contribuyeron a nuestro entendimiento a la medida del universo.
And that is the key, because the progress of the Jesuit order contribute to understanding our measurement of the universe, because they are the creator of the astronomical unit based on the distance from the Earth to the Sun. If we don't have that measure, that 196 million of miles, they don't have a unit to extrapolate to the rest of the universe. So that is why it's so important in the heliocentric model to achieve that measurement, and they really spend a lot of money and blood trying to come up with that measurement, because without that they don't have any clue how to lie us about that kind of how is the distance from here to Saturn, or the Polaris. That is all based in that astronomical unit. So not only that, but
Contribuyeron a nuestro
here we're
entendimiento
going to
a la
see
medida del
that
universo.
the Jesuit order is the order with most astronomers in the
According to
history of the
Copernicus
world.
publications, it is probable the Jesuit order has produced more astronomers than any other demographic in Europe. That, ostensibly, a religious order should produce so many scientists should cause surprise. However, as these scientists have focused nearly exclusively in but one area, this gives us reason to question.
And that gives us reason to question, because that nothing of this is told in school or in universities. They just skip forward all this part of the history. So for me, the heliocentric model is a perfect representation that in our days we have computers, so all the math that you will, in the past, they need to be instruct us in terms of mathematical to our brain process numbers into images. Numbers of measurements or distance into images. Right now they don't need that because they have computers. So they just process all that numbers in images via computer. We don't need anymore, you don't need that your slave are, instructed slavery. You just put image out there, and if you research and read the Protocol of Science, one of the protocol, the number 2, is referred to how they create agents in the school, in the educational system to instruct us via images. It doesn't matter. The people right now, our childs in the school are educated via images. They don't, if you doesn't present an image, they don't even can imagine what you're trying to say. Because the system of being indoctrinated via images is more productive than just simply words and make it, trying to reason, trying to, become rational about what you're trying to say. No, you just present an image and you cut off all kind of other possibilities. You just try, just tie to that image. And it's on purpose of that. It's all purpose. It's not just a random thing. It all came in our day from UNESCO. And they don't talk about the trivium, the quadrivium, or others methods of education, which in fact they refer, for example, this system of education that came from the Greeks, they refer to the liberal art in the expression of the medieval concept inherited from classical antiquity, cultivated by free men and opposite to the servile art, typically of a servant or slave. And our education system that we receive today is based on the slavery part of this. We don't receive a free education. So I'm going to skip a little forward because I see the time, and I believe someone took me 50 minutes from my original time. I don't know if 30 minutes passed so fast, but I'm going to try to, 35. Okay. Well, 10 minutes more, it's 10 minutes more. So, what I'm trying to say is, for me, when Nikola Tesla said that famous quote that if you want to find the secret of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, I try to not only think in terms of experiment, just in electricity and magnetism, but also in terms of the voice, in sounds, in our own thoughts. If you want to sing that way, there are also vibrations in our body. That is why, for me, it's very important the Germanic medicine. If you want to go to the Chinese, whatever. For me, the Germanic medicine, at least for Occidental part of the world, is very nice to study. But after all, everything that we have inside is a vibration. It's a frequency, because if you're trying to imagine something right now that make you cry, there is no physical place to that image that make you cry. But at the end, it's make you cry. So that is why all the seeds are, or not all, but the majority are psychological, because the word psyche means soul. So what is the soul? You cannot find in a particular spot in location, in time and space. So trying to understand from this perspective, you can use this quote to understand in terms of maybe experiment part, but also in terms of the spiritual part, if you want to see in that way. So I want to skip forward a little bit, because I want to tie this with the heliocentric model. And one of the best thing that these people recommend us to imagine, the majority of the of the hypotheses or theories that they give us start with that word. Imagine that you are, imagine that you have, all the time they trying to bring that imagination to our life. And one of the most important is gravity, of course. If they don't have gravity, they cannot support the model. But when you go to the scientific guys trying to explain gravity, and I know many of you saw this, is where you came out.
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
Wow.
No, here's the difference. We can describe gravity. We can say what it does to other things. We can measure it, predict with it. But when you start asking, like, what it is, I don't know.
I hate to say this, but there's no such thing as the force of gravity.
What? I wish I didn't know that.
Sorry, say that again.
There's no
It's only
such thing as
theories.
false gravity.
Explain that. Newton said that if an object falls, it's because there's a mysterious force called gravity pulling it down.
Mysterious.
But you know, Isaac Newton himself was not satisfied by that. Objects move because they're pushed, not pulled. So what is pushing this? Newton didn't know. So Newton simply threw his hands up and said, I don't know. So I'm going to invent something called gravitational pull. And said, I don't know. So I'm going to invent something called gravitational pull.
So, in fact, in our times, it was. I see this. I cannot remember the YouTube channel where I see this, but even, you know, for example, people that like Steve Jobs, it's been involved in this kind of study, because why, you know, why he's gonna say this if he's not interested?
The elements of discovery are around you. You don't need a computer to know. I mean, you know, here. Why does that fall? You know why? Nobody knows why. Nobody in the entire world knows why that falls. We can describe it pretty accurately, but no one knows why. I don't need a computer to get a kid interested in that, to spend a week playing with gravity and trying to understand it and come up with reasons why.
That words, you know, for me, it's the same words that the Grace Tyson uses. I don't know which was the first who said it, but remember that, for example, this guy, Steve Jobs, the first Apple computer logo, it was this Newton with the Apple here. This is not the first one of those logos. And of course, it has a few. If you research about the life of Steve Jobs and the computer itself, the Silicon Valley itself, it's also made by occultist guys. You know, I don't say that Steve Jobs was one of those, but the top of the head of Silicon Valley, they are occultists. And of course, in our days, we have our computer software that create those images to present us, for example, the heliocentric model. They all had all this symbology behind it. You know, for example, one of the most applications uses in our day, like the Adobe Suite. You know, suddenly after the Flat Earth came out, they start using images of astronauts, aliens, horizons. You know, even in his promos, they use this concept of the Flat Earth Society, pyramids, eyes, even, for example, Baphomet in his logo of After Effects, you know, infinity planes, pyramids all the time. Adobe with the pyramid Autodesk changed his logo, its logo from the 90s to 2000, creating this pyramid. The NVIDIA logo is the all-seeing eye. Even Microsoft in the original logo has this tiny pyramid between the O and the S. You know, Sun Microsystem, the original logo of Intel was a pyramid. I mean, you know, if you start looking, it's all around us. This is magic for they, or you know, it's like a wizardry for us, if you want to see in that way. But you know, talking about gravity, I'm not going to spend much time, but it's all based on assumption, because for the gravitational, the big G, they need to assume all these measurements. The only thing that you can really test is just the acceleration of that object falling to the ground. That is the only empirical evidence that you have. But the rest is just all assumption. And they took a lot of centuries to become up with that, because the first value and the only value they have was this. And then they create like a reverse engineering and they have Eratosthenes at the beginning with the radius of the Earth. Then they know how to take the density via volume. So they spend a few centuries doing this, and then they extrapolate and, you know, calculate. Who is going to believe that they measure the weight of the Earth? So, and the mass of the Earth. How they how you do it. You know, of course, the official science is gonna bring Cavendish experiment, and you know, it's all indirect models. It's all indirect measurements. They don't have any direct measurements. Of course, the radio of the Earth, we know that the most, you know, deep hole that we made to trying to test that is just the 0.2%. Then you have, for example, imagine trying to know how the very center of the supposed sphere or the planet. Because every time they measure and they use the big G, they assume the very center to the very center of the other object. But who knows what is the very center of Mars, of Saturn, of, you know, but all the things that they use in space is just in our imagination, so they can use whatever they want to say as that, we're gonna put this satellite base on that, on this, and it's not any collateral damage, because there is nothing out there. So they don't have any, you know, real risk in that sense. And for example, when you're trying to came out with densities, imagine trying to calculate the density in our Earth with all the different materials, you know, dirt, humans, foliage, trees, people walking. It's impossible to know what is inside the Earth. How you know how to measure the weight of the Earth if you only go down 0.2% of the radio? You don't know even which is which are the materials in the 90% of the sphere. So how you came about with the density of the Earth is impossible. And of course, when you go to the most important experiment to determine this, they are all from the Freemason Lodge. There you have Cavendish, and there you have Bouguer, which come from, it's a French scientist, all with this, you know, the hand symbol. So for me, the real equation for the gravity is more this than just the regular F equal, right? G equal. It's more like a Newton, Cavendish, Bouguer, masculine with the electrons. If you see in these history terms, it's more believable than, you know, the original formula that they give us. But they need to spend all this money and centuries trying to get this reverse engineering. So the sun, for me, is an electromagnetic source, as the electrical universe, you know, trying to explain. But of course, they mix all the time this, you know, for example, this is from the book of Dr. Einstein. He said, a magnetic field and electrical field are physical realities, and that's true. Nobody can deny that because we can experiment. Nobody knows how a magnet works. We can describe, it's like the gravity, it's like the acceleration of the object towards the ground. Nobody knows what is going on. We can describe it. We can describe what a magnet does, but we cannot explain how it magic that that object does. Nobody, because you cannot find a particle involved in that attraction or repulsion. You can. It's simply as that. But that is a physical reality. So they're trying to mix, you know, the gravitational field is much a physical reality as an electromagnetic field. So they're trying to, you know, say, okay, that magnet's behavior, well, imagine a gravitational field is something like that. You can see there, well, imagine it's something like that. And when you start looking at the movement of the sun and how maybe this is just my research, and this is not an empirical confirmation, because nobody goes there and touch the object and really analyze. But when you start to look into the path of the sun, you're going to see the analemma, right? And when you see from the perspective of the ground, the analemma is like a number 8, with some part of the 8 more biggest than the other part. Depends of what part of the world you are. So that means that, you know, there's going to be involved like electrical orbit or movement, and that refers that there is going to be a change in acceleration, because we all have 24 hours all the days, but this object make different path, different area. They cover different area in the same time. So when we look like this, we perceive like there is some kind of aid, and maybe if we have the possibility to look from the top, maybe we start understand that it's like just a circle going up and down, because as you know, the seasons in the heliocentric model are explained by the distance and the change in the angle of rotation of the Earth. But the most important thing is that is in the distance of the light source. So we can explain the same thing. Let me just go back a little bit and put it play again. We can explain the same thing, because if we know that that object called sun is more up in some part of the world, and more when we are, if you look at this into the Gleason map, you're gonna see that the bottom part is more big, because it's when the sun is in the south. So it needs to cover more area, because if you look into the Gleason map, it's gonna be more wide, of course, the circle. The perimeter is more big than the center. So when the sun is, when you have summer here in Europe, the sun is more height, but it makes a small circle. When we have summer, the suns go down and make a more biggest circle. That is the lemma. But the season is explained in the flat Earth in the same way as the heliocentric trying to explain. Is the distance to the light source. It's simply as that. Simple as that, at least for me, of course, right? So what I'm trying to look to show in that computer graphic is that we see like a number 8, but if we have the opportunity to see from the top, it may be a circle. It's almost an elliptical orbit, but in more circle fashion with different altitude, just that. So you can see in this way, if you want, you can see just in this spiral, fashion. The moon has also an analemma, and that is why maybe they need to explain via the second law of Kepler, they need to explain that supposedly it's the Earth that accelerate and decelerate during 1 year, because they still need to reverse engineering that number 8 created by the sun. So if you want to assume that the sun is fixed and we rotate around the sun, we still have that shape. So the reverse engineering of that is like the Earth accelerates towards, some part of the orbit, and then decelerate because they need to complete these 24 hours each day. It's all the days are the same kind. We have the same kind of hours. So this is just the analemma, the time lapse of analemma in different. In different point of view. This is the number 8, and if you extrapolate that every day and the same hour, you're gonna have this kind of path when you observe this in the sky. So let me skip a little forward, of course, and sorry for my fast presentation, but Paul talks about the different distances along the history that they used to make, his model, the model, the heliocentric model. All the time they change it without any consequences, because it's not real things. At that time, you don't even need to think in terms of lying about the space technology. So you just drop numbers. But the most important thing for me about this is the connection to the Jesuit order, because all these guys, supposedly, the guy who came with the fixed number of 93 million miles was Maximilian Hell, and he was from the Jesuit order, and he's like the master that created the astronomical unit. And let me just, then came, for example, even for the temperature of the sun, it's involved a Night Lord, which was Kelvin, which belonged to the Royal Society. So all the time we have this connection that, one approves the other, but they are friends, so why they gonna be against one of each other, right? In fact, in our, normal history, they say that hell was also interested in the magnetotherapy, which is something that our science is still sometimes deny or saying that it doesn't, that doesn't have any effect on us. But we are electrical magnetical organisms. So of course you want to try to, cure or change something in our vibration. You're gonna try to use one of the best options out there, which is magnets. And even the history said that the publication of his results was delayed, and some, especially Joseph, accused hell to possibly of falsifying his result. Because when this expedition came along to measure via the transit of Venus, like Paul explained before, the only important results to take into account that measurement was the results presented by this Jesuit. All the other astronomers, it just, they present the numbers, but the final number to really, say, okay, this is the real distance the sun to the earth, was presented by this guy. But this guy took 1 year to present it. So one of the, most of these colleagues say, hey man, we talk about present this, quickly. You cannot take 1 year to present this paper, because I start thinking that you are doing a lot of math trying to, things that make the things work. And anytime you look out there, you're gonna see these kind of orders involved, and all. Even his contemporary, colleagues accuse these orders to falsify numbers and results. But nothing. I believe if you go out there and trying to talk with an astronomer and ask how they measure the distance to the sun, maybe he explained it. And when you ask, and who was it? I at least in my experience, anytime that I talk with these guys, they never knew who was Maximilian Hell. So the heliocentric model architects, the first one, are these guys. They come from the church. That is why I put that video at the beginning. Even our Big Bang theory came from the church. And these guys, they don't want to be in the front row, and never. So they create these other layers, like the Royal Academy, and the Royal Academy, create, if you want to see that way, the UNESCO. So anytime you're trying to find the top of the head, you have all these layers that you never. How many people out there, expose Jesuit? Because there is a lot of people talking about Zionists and Jews, but nobody say nothing about Jesuit. Jesuit is just, like normal, just saints walking in his feet in the jungle, drinking tea and contemplating the sky. But nobody not accuse, at least expose the Jesuit order, which is the military and academic order that create all the educational system. And of course, they create the heliocentric model. So I have so less time, but it's all about, sun worship, again. And this is my opinion, of course, but when you go into the religions from the beginning, maybe not the ancient religion in terms of shamanic religions, but the majority of religions out there is just, they use the sun to represent his beliefs. I'm saying not all, of course, but the majority, for me at least in my research, all refer all the time to the sun. And I believe that is, for them, they are very important to use the sun as his model, because right now, for example, the sun is what gives the opportunity to create measurement, to create the heliocentric model. Of course, in our minds, not in reality. In reality, we see the sun move in the sky, we see the sun at the same size of the moon. They need to avoid our senses. So Georges Lamaitre not only talked about the Big Bang theory, but he was one of the first proposed in the atom model, because they use the atom analogy to, trying to say, this is the orbital mechanics, like an atom, but imagine in the big scale. But when you look, nobody see an atom ever. Nobody see the particle. They use the word particle. Define me particle. I mean, show me a particle of something. Nobody can show nothing. In fact, in the London conference, I asked one of the astrophysicists that, what is the particle in charge of a magnet? Because the magnet works. We don't need to go to the quantum, the quarks, the muons, that kind of name that they use. Show me a particle in charge of the mechanism of the magnet. And you cannot do it. It's fields. And what is a field? Show me a field. How can you bend time and space if you don't have geometry? It's impossible. It's impossible. I mean, show me a particle of time to bend it, because you need something physical. If you're gonna say that we're gonna bend something, you cannot bend love, for example. Bending a love, no, because that is a concept. You cannot bend it. You cannot transfer. If you want to see in physical terms, we are not talking philosophy. We are talking about science. So if you're gonna bend time and space to justify your model, you need to show me that. We are waiting. So when you start to look into the, this concept between magnets and electricity in terms of symbology, of course this is the model of the atom god, because atom means sun god. That is why they use the atom model, because saying atom is like saying sun. It's just another analogy of that. So when you start looking into the electrical model of the electrical magnetism model of the sun, of course, in terms of color, all the time you refer to blue and red, to refer a magnet. So when you go to the religion, you're gonna see that, for example, in the Catholic religion, the representation of Jesus always is in blue and red, with this spherical yellow behind the head. And that is a symbology of the sun, because the sun is electrical and magnetic. And if Jesus represents the sun, for them, of course, for the Catholic Church, they dress in electrical and magnetic color. So let me just go a little bit forward. Electric fields, you can see electric fields. Of course, you need a medium.
You can witness the electric field in action when using a plasma ball. The electric field around a plasma ball is strong enough to ionize mercury, neon, helium, and even the air itself.
But you all the time need some medium.
But the effect weakens with distance.
That behavior, that physicality, if you want. If you see this light is not light. There is a gas inside of that lamp. So how is we can see the sun out in the space, for example, in the vacuum of space, if you don't have any medium to transmit light or to project that light? Because it's empty, supposedly, right? So I'm gonna skip forward because I know some of you know the Dan Dimension videos talking about how these ionized gases can explain our sky in terms of the color that we see when it's a sunset, when it's dusk, where we have daylight, night. It's really, there are really good videos out there, but let me just try to go a little forward, and because sometimes the people, when they see these kind of high altitude balloons, they trying to say that this is the curvature of the Earth, but that is more the curvature of the light, or not the curvature of the light itself, but it's like the source, in this case the sun, that is producing this electromagnetic field, is bending the gases that project the light. It's not because the light doesn't exist there is not an object called light. You just excite, if you want to see, you ionize the gas that is carry on that vibration, if you want to see in that way. So let me just keep forward. For example, with the magnet, you are not bending the light there because there is no light. It's this radiation, it's this plasma, but you all the time need a medium to project these kind of things. So have that in mind, how, for example, our color in the sky can reproduce in the lab, all our electricity that we see in our world can reproduce in the lab and small scale, and something that the majority of the heliocentric model can't do it. They cannot even reproduce the curvature of the water in the lab. They cannot even show us the curvature, the geometrical curvature of the Earth. So I really like to show a little more of the sun issues. Let me just play this and have.
Good afternoon. My name is Don Scott. The electric sun is a sort of a natural outgrowth of the electrical universe hypothesis. We know that there are magnetic fields. Actually had a circuit that showed the electric sun. What I'd like to do today is to show some of the problems of the so-called standard model. That word model should be plural, models, because for everything that we see in the sun, there seems to be a new model, or at least another patch on the previous existing model. Problems that I feel, at least, are fatal, absolutely fatal, for the models that are so-called accepted these days. And I would like to then demonstrate how precisely those problems are no problem at all for the electrical sun model. The big problem, the famous problem, is the missing neutrinos. The idea of this heat transport from the core to the surface. There are some oscillations in the sun's size and brightness. And of course, oscillations in the solar wind, as somebody pointed out the other day. If there's a fusion reaction going on in the core, then how does this reaction, does it have periodicities? That's never been discussed by nuclear physicists. There is actually a temperature minimum in the chromosphere. Where in the world does that come from? If the heat is all generated at the core, the temperature should get lower and lower and lower the further away you get from this thing. And all of a sudden you find there's a minimum and then the temperature increases. Totally inexplicable in light of the present standard so-called model or models. The sun actually oscillates in brightness from a few minutes to near an hour. So the thing is pulsating.
That is very important. I mean, talking about minute and hour in that big mass that they took about, like they take like 5 million of years to get a particle from the nucleus of the sun to the surface. But when you start studying, well, let me just finish the video.
Very rapidly. There's no way in this world, in this solar system, that could happen. And the third one is, to me, astounding if you haven't heard about it. That is, there's an expansion and contraction of the sun in the size of the sun. The thing actually bulges and fluctuates in size, like a balloon. And the extent of that bulging is 10 kilometers.
10 kilometers. How can you detect 10 kilometers in what is the size of the sun? So, but this pulsating is changing in brightness, is inflating and deflating how the FA model it, for example. And so, you know, when you start to have this
and that happens
in mind,
in about a period of about 160 minutes.
You can understand maybe how.
Where did that come from? How
why
do you
our
so-called standard model?
plane of existence is alive, and
They just ignore it.
Dynamics, they just ignore it. Of course, this is something that if you're trying to talk about these things with astrophysicists, they don't even know, because they don't even study the electrical model of the universe. And let me just, because I have some 3 minutes plus 5 minutes more, but let me try to explain the sun visible in space.
So when you actually look at a source in outer space, It is not transmitted. Light is not transmitted in the visible spectrum in outer space. The visible spectrum effect of the sun is created by the upper atmosphere. It will blind you, but you can't see it. What you see is the refraction of the sun in the upper atmosphere. That's all you see. And the minute you get out of the atmosphere, you got no reflection between you and it. Yes.
No refraction between the sun and you, and maybe that is why we don't see stars, of course, but because you need a medium, a dense medium. That maybe they use, radio telescope for some of the study instead of just optical telescope. And this is just a simulation, do it by Arnold. Arnold is a renderer engine. This has a GoPro, of course, because I was doing this for other purpose. But here, if you pay attention, there is a little highlight, white highlight there, because I have a light on the top, projecting light to the ground. But you cannot see it, the light, because the computer software nowadays, they're trying to mimic reality. So in order to see that light, I need to increase and add an atmosphere to the software. So when you, for example, ahora sucede lo mismo, la luz sigue estando. Let me just take out my box. When you start increasing the atmosphere, immediately you're gonna see the light. And that is what I believe Dr. Lehman trying to explain. If you don't have a medium to project light, it's like our gases in our world, is like the gas inside of this lamp. It's an analogy of that. And this was be a nice topic to discuss with Geran about the acceleration of gravity, if we could explain it by electrical and magnetic behavior. I don't have the time to go with this, really sorry, but just give me 3 more minutes and let me try to explain what is, for me at least, our magnetic field, because in all the ancient culture we talk about, all the time they talk about the torus field, the ball field, this analogy of this toroidal, donut magnetic force that's maybe controlling the bull. It's like I like to see the way that is controlling yourself, your own field of energy. But also we have sometimes, if you want to see this in the real life, in antiquity, we have this Sirihantra, which is an instrument, that is the word means. And we all see, this 2D depiction of this kind of art in this of this concept. But when you transfer this to a 3D model, you're gonna see, maybe this is from where it's come all the magnet in our world. Because after all, we have a magnetic field, of course. We have a magnetic donut. So when you start looking in this kind of concept, you can clearly see that this that 2D picture is just like a cross-section of 3D electrical and magnetic field that we have. This is, for the heliocentric model, this is the Van Allen belt. And when you're trying to see this this is from Tesla Apple YouTube channel, but here you can see how that field, you can have it in magnet. So we cannot see particles, but we can see this field represented in terms of light lines. So this is just a ferrocell showing the torus of a tiny magnet. Can you imagine that in the big scale? We don't know what is the center of our world. We, just try, we take a compass and know how that compass points, but no, it's not only the Antarctic close. If you want to go to north, it's also close. We have Russian people there, we have American people there, military guys, of course. And maybe the most important, we have the climate. It's like this model is just an enclosed system, and maybe we are not able to achieve the limits of our world in terms of how this world was designed. So we have magnetic anomalies, for example, and that everybody knows about that. So when you start trying to say how the planets move, how they orbit, well, for me, it's more explicable in terms of electromagnetism than the gravitational model. Because if they don't even can reproduce the gravitational model in the scale, and we don't even see how mass attract another mass, but we can see that in terms of electricity and magnetism. We see in labs how electricity can repel, can attract. So to finish, let me just explain how you can recreate.
We were so excited to be here today. So the first time I met Paul, this was many years ago, I walked in and he said, Karen, I created this sun in a jar. I got this star in a jar. I'm like, you're kidding me. He's like, oh yeah, all that stuff you've learned, put it all in the back of your brain because I'm going to show you something awesome. But this is just to show off. This is to show off Paul and some of the really neat ways that elements work and that chemistry works. And
so what this really is a oversimplification of what Dragon really is. It's combining a yin and yang energy frequency together, and they both attract. They want what each other has. There's value in that exchange. So, contrary to what they teach in science.
Contrary to what they teach in science.
The universe is actually magnetic and light.
The universe is actually magnetic and light.
And light is like
it's not gravitational driven.
It's not gravitational driven.
So what this is I'm going to induce an electrical and magnetic field. This outer ball is the male or yang field, and this silver one inside is the yin or female field.
Fascinating.
So just like males and females like to do, they are going to go at it. So with no further ado, I'm going to now put this over in order to help. So instead of a sun actually being a fusion,
and trying to understand not just the first layer of what he's saying, but the second layer. It's all the time it's contradict the supposedly standard model. They for recreate like a tiny sun, they cannot base in anything that it's called standard. Contrary to what is teaching in science, the universe is magnetic and light. Contrary of the sun making the fusion, eating his own, hydrogen and helium, we made so everything is
eating its own hydrogen and helium, and over time, it's going to use all of its fuel. It's actually the sun is actually being powered.
And this is very important. Nobody knows how the sun works, and it's all right because nobody can go to check it. But all the time, this guy that trying to recreate this object in the sky, they need to say it's powered by something else.
Or by something else. There's something else that's acting on that female field, if you will, that's creating that sun.
There's no fusion in the sun. They don't know how the sun works.
Well, this is
It's a transforms from some other dimension. It's not burning anything. It doesn't have to. It's a converter. I don't know. Nobody knows. But that's what it does. That's the only thing it can do because that's how everything works.
So the sun is not visible.
Not in free space. It's only invisible when gross matter becomes involved, like the Earth's atmosphere and envelope and the surface of the moon or whatever. That makes the light. So that means there's no time delay. So the whole time delay thing is meaningless. It doesn't take light years. There are no light years because there's no light. So that means that the light you see from the distant stars isn't 4 million years old. It could be only minutes old. It could be instantaneous. All the theories collapse when you can't see the stars in outer space.
And you cannot see it. This is about 400 kilometers. 40 kilometers up in the atmosphere. This arm is blocking the sun to studying the atmosphere. And look how the shadows is diverging from the central point. I say that to Eratosthenes, that he assumed that the parallel rays came, the sun projecting parallel rays. So I don't have much time. I don't have time delay. it left me a few things about the stars, the sonoluminescence thing, you know, even the symbology behind the alien invasion that is referred all the time with the god Pan, you know, the theory behind how our life came to the earth. It's called panspermia. It's the sperm of Pan, because they use all the time Pangea, you know, Jack Parson, in fact, he was one of the worships of this culture. I don't have much time, but just let me begin. Oh, it's gone, okay. Okay, guys, thank you. Thank you for coming.
That we had to obviously rush it, but we're trying to keep on schedule. I just want to mention that Douglas Tolt has got his book, that's a fiction book about Flat Earth. That's actually a good read. I actually bought it the other day. We've also got Mark Devlin has actually got his book about resonance frequency, about the music industry. That's actually worth looking at. We're going to be back here at 1 o'clock. If you can actually, I know it's been a long morning and I apologise for that, but because we're only doing this over one day, we've obviously got a bit of a clock. So see you in about 55 minutes. Thank you.